Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into a world where Christmas was forbidden, where singing carols could get you arrested, and where the holiday we know and love today simply didn't exist. Imagine waking up on December 25th in England and it's just another working day. No decorations, no gifts, no celebration. For nearly 200 years, this was reality. Tonight, we're traveling back to the darkness before the magic, to a time when Christmas was dying and nobody knew if it would ever return. Before we step into this forgotten world together, I'd love it if you could help this channel grow. If you're someone who loves diving deep into history's most fascinating stories, hit that subscribe button. And if tonight's story moves you, if it makes you see Christmas differently, leave a like. I always read your comments, so tell me. Where are you watching from right now? And what's your favorite Christmas tradition? I'm genuinely curious. Now, dim those lights, get comfortable under your blankets, maybe let a little background noise from a fan or soft rain sounds keep you company. Let's travel back in time together. December 24th, 1657, London. A family sits quietly in their home. The father glances nervously at the window. His wife holds their young daughter close. On the table, no feast, no special meal, just ordinary bread and broth. The same thing they ate yesterday. The same thing they'll eat tomorrow. Papa, the little girl whispers. The old stories grandmother told about the Christmas feast. Were they real? The father puts a finger to his lips. Shoo, child. We don't speak of such things. Not anymore. Outside in the cold December darkness, soldiers patrol the streets. They're looking for anyone who dares to celebrate, anyone who dares to make this day special. Because in Cromwell's England, Christmas is a crime. This isn't fiction. This is history. In 1647, the English Parliament under the control of Oliver Cromwell and his Puritan government did something almost unthinkable. They canceled Christmas. Not just discouraged it, not just frowned upon it, they literally banned it by law. The official decree stated that December 25th was to be observed as a fast day, a day of repenting for sins, not a day of celebration. Shops were ordered to stay open. Anyone caught celebrating could be fined or arrested, and they were serious about it. In the streets of London, soldiers would walk from house to house, peering into windows, searching for any signs of festivity. Was that the smell of roasting meat? Suspicious. Were those people singing? Arrest them. Did someone dare to decorate their home with holly and ivy, the traditional greenery of Christmas? That family would be reported to the authorities. The Puritans believed that Christmas had become too pagan, too indulgent, too focused on feasting and drinking and merrymaking. They looked at the way people celebrated the wild parties, the excessive drinking, the carnival-like atmosphere, and they said, this is not godly. This is not holy. This must stop. And you know what? In some ways, they had a point. Medieval and Tudor Christmas celebrations were absolutely wild. We're talking 12 days of non-stop partying. Lords would hold massive feasts where hundreds of people would eat and drink until they literally couldn't anymore. There were games, gambling, cross-dressing, role rehearsals where servants became masters for a day. The whole social order turned upside down. It was like New Year's Eve, Halloween, and Mardi Gras all rolled into 1 times 12. The Puritans looked at this chaos and said, nowhere in the Bible does it say Jesus was born on December 25th. This is just a pagan Roman festival that got renamed. We're Christians. We should worship God soberly and seriously, not through drunken revelry. So, they killed Christmas. For 13 years from 1647 to 1660, Christmas was officially illegal in England. But here's what's fascinating. People didn't just accept it. In Canterbury in 1647, when the town crier announced that everyone must work on Christmas Day, riots broke out. People fought back. They wanted their Christmas. Not for religious reasons necessarily, but because it was their one time of year to rest, to feast, to forget about the grinding poverty and hardship of daily life. The government crushed these rebellions. Christmas went underground. Families celebrated in secret behind closed doors with curtains drawn. They whispered their carols instead of singing them. They hid their decorations. They pretended to work while their hearts yearned for celebration. For 13 years, Christmas became a ghost. Present in memory but absent from life. Then in 1660, everything changed. Charles II, the son of the King Cromwell had executed, returned to England and restored the monarchy. One of his first acts, he brought Christmas back. The people rejoiced. Churches rang their bells. Families feasted. For one beautiful moment, it seemed like Christmas had been saved. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Even though Christmas was legal again, it never fully recovered. Think about it. An entire generation had grown up without Christmas. Children born in 1647 were 13 years old in 1660. They had no memory of public celebrations, no memory of the old traditions. The continuity had been broken. The knowledge of how to celebrate. The songs, the customs, the rituals had been scattered and lost. By the early 1700s, Christmas in England had become awkward. Some families still tried to celebrate it. Others ignored it completely. It wasn't illegal anymore, but it wasn't popular either. It was this weird half-forgotten holiday that nobody quite knew what to do with. Meanwhile, in other parts of Europe, Christmas was thriving. In Germany, families had been decorating evergreen trees in their homes for centuries. In Catholic countries like France, Italy, and Spain, Christmas remained one of the most important holidays of the year with elaborate church services, nativity scenes, and festive meals. But in Protestant England, Christmas was dying a slow, quiet death. Here's a mind-blowing fact. By the 1820s and 1830s, just a few years before Queen Victoria took the throne, many English people didn't even get Christmas Day off work. It was just another day. Some wealthy families might host a modest dinner. Some churches held services. But there was none of the magic, none of the wonder, none of the universal celebration we associate with Christmas today. If you were a working-class person in London in 1835, your Christmas probably looked like this. You'd wake up before dawn just like any other day. You'd walk to the factory or the shop where you worked. You'd labor for 12, maybe 14 hours. You'd come home exhausted. Maybe if you were lucky, you'd have a slightly better meal than usual. Maybe you'd tell your children a story about the old days when Christmas meant something. But that's it. No presents, no tree, no carols sung in the streets, no stockings hung by the chimney, nothing. The holiday that would become the most celebrated day of the year in much of the Western world was in England in the early 1830s, barely clinging to life. But something was about to change. Someone was about to change it. In 1837, an 18-year-old girl became Queen of England. Her name was Victoria. She was young. She was idealistic. And she was about to marry a German prince who would bring with him a tradition that would transform Christmas forever. But before we meet Prince Albert and discover how he sparked the Christmas Renaissance, we need to understand just how far Christmas had fallen. We need to feel that absence, that loss, that darkness, because only then can we truly appreciate the magic that was about to be reborn. Sitting here tonight in our world of Christmas lights and holiday music and gift-wrapped presents under decorated trees, it's almost impossible to imagine a world without Christmas. But that world existed in England for generations. People lived their entire lives barely knowing what Christmas was supposed to be. The question isn't just how did Christmas die? The real question is, how did it come back from the dead? And that's where our story truly begins, with a young queen, a German prince, and a simple evergreen tree that would change the world. But that transformation didn't happen overnight. And it wasn't just about pretty decorations. It was about something deeper. Something that spoke to the human need for light in the darkness, for hope in despair, for magic in an increasingly industrial world. We'll discover all of that in just a moment. But first, let's meet the man who brought Christmas back to England and who did it through the most powerful force in the world, love. Picture this. October 1839, a 19-year-old prince steps off a boat onto English soil. His name is Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gullah. He speaks English with a thick German accent. He's never been to England before. He's nervous, homesick, and utterly unprepared for what's about to happen. Within days, Queen Victoria, who had met Albert briefly when they were both teenagers, falls completely, hopelessly, head over heels in love with him. And I mean completely. This isn't some arranged political marriage where two royals tolerate each other for the sake of duty. Victoria's diary entries from this period read like something out of a romance novel. She describes Albert as beautiful, excessively handsome, with such a sweet expression. She writes that his eyes are large and blue, his nose exquisite, his mouth very pretty. The girl was absolutely smitten. On October 15, 1839, just 5 days after Albert arrived, Victoria proposed to him. Yes, she proposed to him. Because she was the queen, protocol demanded that she do the asking. Can you imagine how nerve-wracking that must have been? Even queens get nervous about confessing their feelings. Albert said, yes, obviously. They married on February 10, 1840 in the Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace in London. Victoria wore a white dress, which was unusual at the time. Most brides wore colorful gowns and started a trend that continues to this day. But that's a story for another time. What matters for our story is this. Albert was deeply, profoundly homesick. You have to understand Albert didn't choose to come to England. He was born in Germany, raised in Germany, spoke German as his first language. All his childhood memories, all his traditions, all the things that made him feel safe and at home, they were German. And suddenly, at 20 years old, he's transplanted to a foreign country where people speak a different language, eat different food, follow different customs. A country where, by the way, many people resented him for being German and saw him as an outsider stealing their queen. The English press was brutal to him in those early years. They called him a foreigner. They questioned his loyalty. They mocked his accent. Parliament even refused to give him the title Prince Consort for years. He was just Prince Albert, like he was some guest who might leave at any moment. Albert was lonely, desperately lonely. And loneliness has a funny way of making us cling to the traditions of home. December 1840, Albert and Victoria's first Christmas as a married couple. They're at Windsor Castle, that massive ancient fortress that had been home to English monarchs for centuries. It's cold. It's formal. It's very, very English. And Albert is miserable. He misses his family. He misses Germany. He misses the way Christmas felt when he was a child. The warmth, the magic, the sense of wonder. In Germany, Christmas wasn't a dying, half-forgotten holiday. It was alive, vibrant. In German homes, families would bring an evergreen tree indoors, decorate it with candles and handmade ornaments, and gather around it on Christmas Eve to sing and exchange gifts. It was beautiful. It was meaningful. It was home. So Albert did something that seemed at the time quite strange to the English people around him. He had servants bring a fir tree, a whole tree into Windsor Castle. He had it set up in one of the rooms and then he decorated it German style with candles, cookies, fruits, and small toys. Victoria was charmed. She'd never seen anything like it. In her journal, she wrote about how the tree was lit up by many little candles and how it created such a festive atmosphere. She loved it. More than that, she loved seeing Albert happy, seeing him smile, seeing a little bit of that homesickness fade from his eyes. But here's the thing, nobody else saw it. This was a private celebration, just the royal family behind closed doors. The British public had no idea that their queen was standing in front of a Christmas tree. And if they had known, they probably would have thought it was weird. Because remember, in 1840, Christmas trees weren't a thing in England. They were seen as a strange German custom, foreign, other. The tree might have remained Victoria and Albert's private tradition, a sweet, intimate thing they did together if not for what happened 8 years later. 1848, this is the moment. This is when everything changes. The Illustrated London News, one of the most popular publications in England, publishes an engraving of the royal family celebrating Christmas. And right there in the center of the image is a Christmas tree. The image shows Victoria and Albert standing on either side of the tree with their children gathered around. The tree is decorated with candles, ornaments, and presents hanging from the branches. At the top of the tree, and this is important, there's a small figure, an angel, or a star. The family looks happy, peaceful, together. The caption reads, Christmas tree at Windsor Castle. Now, let me tell you something about the power of images. We live in a world of Instagram and TikTok where we're bombarded with images every second of every day. But in 1848, images were rare, precious. When a magazine published an engraving, people studied it. They talked about it. They showed it to their neighbors. An image in the Illustrated London News could reach hundreds of thousands of people, and those people would actually pay attention. And this image of the royal family around their Christmas tree. It went absolutely viral. Suddenly, everyone wanted a Christmas tree. Not because it was German, not because it was traditional, but because the Queen had one. You have to understand the psychology at play here. In Victorian England, class aspiration was everything. The growing middle class, factory owners, merchants, professionals, they had money now, thanks to the Industrial Revolution. But they didn't have status. They weren't aristocrats. They weren't born into the upper classes. So they did what middle classes have always done. They copied the people above them. If the Queen decorated a Christmas tree, then by God, they would decorate Christmas trees, too. And it wasn't just about copying. The image that the Illustrated London News published was carefully crafted, probably more carefully than anyone realized at the time. It showed the royal family as a family, not as distant godlike figures, not as cold, formal rulers, but as parents and children gathered together celebrating a holiday. It made the monarchy seem relatable, warm, human. This was revolutionary. For centuries, monarchs had maintained their power through distance, through mystery, through being fundamentally different from ordinary people. But Victoria and Albert were selling a different vision. We're just like you. We have children. We celebrate holidays. We value family time. And people ate it up. By the 1850s, Christmas trees were everywhere in middle-class English homes. You could buy decorations at shops. Street vendors sold small fir trees. Books and magazines published instructions on how to decorate your tree in the German fashion. What had been a private intimate tradition for Albert had become a national phenomenon. But here's what I find most beautiful about this story. Albert never meant for any of this to happen. He wasn't trying to start a trend. He wasn't trying to revive Christmas. He was just homesick. He just wanted a piece of his childhood back. He just wanted to feel for one night a year like he was home. And somehow that simple, honest, deeply personal desire transformed an entire culture's relationship with Christmas. Think about that for a moment. One man's nostalgia became a nation's tradition. One man's loneliness became the seed of joy for millions. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that the most human thing? Now, I want to be clear about something because historians argue about this. Victoria and Albert did not invent the Christmas tree. Trees had been used in pagan winter celebrations for centuries. German families had been decorating Christmas trees since the 1500s. There are even records of Christmas trees in England before Victoria. Queen Charlotte, the wife of George III, had set up a Christmas tree at Windsor Castle back in 1800. But nobody cared about Queen Charlotte's tree. It didn't spread. It didn't catch on. It remained an obscure curiosity. So what was different about Victoria and Albert's tree? Timing, media, and love. By 1848, England was ready for Christmas to come back. People were exhausted from the Industrial Revolution's grinding, relentless pace. They were working in factories, living in cities, disconnected from the old rural rhythms of life. They were craving something to bring them together, something to make them feel human again. And there was a new middle class with disposable income and a desire to create a warm, respectable home life. To prove they were cultured, that they had values, that they were good people. The Christmas tree offered all of that. It was beautiful. It was family-oriented. It was respectable. And now, thanks to mass media, everyone could see exactly how it was done. But I think there's another reason Victoria and Albert's tree captured people's imagination, and it's something we don't talk about enough. Their love story. Everyone knew Victoria adored Albert. Everyone knew this was a genuine love match, not just a political arrangement. And when people saw that image of them standing together by the tree with their children, they weren't just seeing a decoration. They were seeing a vision of what love looks like, what family looks like, what happiness looks like. The tree wasn't just evergreen branches and candles. It was a symbol of love, of home, of belonging. And isn't that what we all want, especially at Christmas? By the time Albert died in 1861, devastating Victoria, who would mourn him for the rest of her life, the Christmas tree was firmly established in British culture. It had spread to America, where it became even more popular. Today, the tradition is so universal that we can barely imagine Christmas without it. But every Christmas tree in every home, every shopping mall, every town square, every single one traces back to a homesick German prince who just wanted to remember his childhood. Victoria continued the tradition after Albert died. Every Christmas until the end of her life in 1901, she had a tree set up at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, where she and Albert had spent so many happy holidays. The servants would decorate it exactly as Albert had liked it. Victoria would sit beside it, remembering, grieving, but also feeling close to him, if only for a moment. That's the power of tradition, isn't it? It connects us across time. It lets us reach back and touch the people we've lost. It makes the dead feel present, alive, real. But Albert's Christmas legacy didn't stop at the tree. He had awakened something in the English people, a hunger for Christmas magic, for ritual, for celebration. And once that hunger was awakened, it demanded to be fed. Other traditions began to emerge, to flourish, to spread. And one of them, one simple, brilliant innovation would revolutionize not just Christmas, but human connection itself. It started with an artist, a printing press, and 1,000 cards that almost nobody wanted to buy. But we'll discover how that failure became one of the most enduring Christmas traditions of all in just a moment. London, December 1843. Sir Henry Cole has a problem. Actually, he has about 200 problems. 200 friends, colleagues, and acquaintances he needs to send Christmas greetings to. And it's already mid-December. Now, you might be thinking, 200 Christmas cards? That doesn't sound too bad. I could knock that out in an evening. But here's the thing. Christmas cards don't exist yet. Henry Cole would have to sit down with pen and ink and write 200 individual letters by hand in Victorian script with perfect penmanship, because anything less would be considered rude. Have you ever tried to handwrite just 10 thank you notes? How long did that take you? Now multiply that by 20. That's Henry Cole's December. And Cole is not someone with a lot of free time. He's already one of the busiest men in London. He's a civil servant, a designer, an innovator. He's working on postal reform. He's planning what will eventually become the Victoria and Albert Museum. He'll be its first director. He's involved in organizing the Great Exhibition of 1851. The man has approximately 17 jobs and exactly 0 hours to write Christmas letters. So he sits at his desk one evening staring at a stack of blank paper and thinks there has to be a better way. And that thought, that single moment of frustration, is about to change Christmas forever. But to understand why Cole's idea was revolutionary, we need to talk about something that had just transformed England 3 years earlier. The penny post. Before 1840, sending mail in England was expensive. Really expensive. The cost of sending a letter was based on distance and number of pages, and the recipient, not the sender, had to pay. Imagine ordering something online and the delivery person shows up at your door demanding payment before they'll hand it over. That's how mail worked. This meant most ordinary people never sent letters. It was a luxury for the wealthy. If you wanted to communicate with someone far away, you'd have to wait until you saw them in person or send a message through a traveling acquaintance or just not communicate at all. But in 1840, a man named Rowland Hill revolutionized the system. He introduced the penny post. 1 penny to send a letter anywhere in Britain. Prepaid by the sender using an adhesive stamp. The first postage stamp ever created, the penny black, went on sale in May 1840. This was like the internet being invented. Suddenly, everyone could afford to send mail. Working-class people could write to their families. Lovers separated by distance could exchange letters. Businesses could communicate with customers across the country. The volume of mail exploded. In 1839, before the penny post, about 76 million letters were sent in Britain. By 1849, that number had jumped to 329 million. Think about that. A more than 4-fold increase in just 10 years. People were discovering the joy of written connection. And Henry Cole, who had actually worked with Rowland Hill on the postal reforms, saw an opportunity. If everyone could now afford to send mail, why not create a pre-printed greeting card that people could send for Christmas? Now, this might not sound revolutionary to us. We're used to buying cards for every occasion. Birthday cards, sympathy cards, congratulations cards, sorry your goldfish died cards. But in 1843, this concept didn't exist. If you wanted to send someone a greeting, you wrote them a letter, a unique, personal, handwritten letter. Cole's idea was, what if the greeting could be printed? What if an artist could design something beautiful? A printer could reproduce it 1,000 times and people could simply add their signature and send it. It would save time. It would be convenient. It would make seasonal greetings accessible to everyone, not just those with perfect penmanship and hours of free time. Cole commissioned an artist friend named John Colcat Horsley to design the card. And here's where things get interesting, because the card Horsley created was controversial. Shockingly controversial. The design showed a Victorian family, 3 generations gathered together. In the center panel, they're raising glasses in a toast. Adults are drinking wine. Even the children appear to be sipping from glasses. On either side of this central image are smaller panels showing acts of charity. Feeding the hungry, clothing the poor. At the top, the text reads, "A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you." The card was lithographed, a printing technique that allowed for color and hand-colored. It was beautiful, sophisticated, expensive to produce. Cole had 1,000 of them printed. He sold them in his art shop, Felix Sumley's Home Treasury Office, for 1 shilling each. Now, a shilling in 1843 was not cheap. For context, that penny post letter cost 1 penny. Cole's card cost 12 times that. For working-class people, a shilling was several hours' wages. This was a luxury item. But Cole wasn't marketing to working-class people. He was marketing to people like himself, the rising middle class, people with disposable income who wanted to appear cultured and modern and connected to the latest trends. Surely, he thought, his 200 friends and acquaintances would love these cards. Surely other people facing the same problem. Too many people to write to, too little time, would snap them up. The cards went on sale in December 1843. They were a complete failure. Almost nobody bought them. Out of 1,000 cards printed, Cole sold maybe a dozen. Maybe. Why? Well, remember that controversial design I mentioned? Victorians were outraged. They looked at that image of children drinking wine and lost their minds. How dare you depict children consuming alcohol? This is promoting drunkenness. What kind of a moral message is this sending? You have to understand, Victorian England was in the midst of a massive temperance movement. People were crusading against alcohol, seeing it as the root of all social ills. And here was Henry Cole, printing cards that showed children raising glasses at Christmas. He'd miscalculated badly. The few people who did buy the cards probably kept quiet about it, not wanting to be associated with such scandal. The art shop where Cole sold them was an obscure location. There was no advertising campaign, no way for the idea to spread. Henry Cole's revolutionary Christmas card idea died on arrival. Almost all of those 1,000 cards ended up in a warehouse somewhere gathering dust. And here's where the story could have ended. A good idea ahead of its time that nobody wanted. History is full of those. But something fascinating happened. Though it took nearly 30 years to unfold, the reason Christmas cards eventually succeeded wasn't because people suddenly decided Cole's design was fine. It wasn't because of brilliant marketing or celebrity endorsement. It was because the world changed. Remember that explosion in mail volume after the penny post? It kept growing and growing. By 1870, the Postal Service introduced an even cheaper rate, the half-penny postcard. You could now send a postcard anywhere in Britain for half a penny. Suddenly, sending seasonal greetings wasn't expensive anymore. It was accessible to almost everyone. At the same time, advances in printing technology made producing colorful illustrated cards much cheaper. What had cost a shilling in 1843 could be mass-produced for pennies by the 1870s. And this is crucial. By the 1870s, Christmas was exploding in popularity. Thanks to Prince Albert's Tree, thanks to Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol, published the same year as Cua's Card 1843. Thanks to the revival of old carols and traditions, Christmas had gone from a dying holiday to the biggest celebration of the year. People wanted to participate. They wanted to mark the occasion. They wanted to feel connected to this growing cultural phenomenon, and sending cards, beautiful printed cards, was the perfect way to do it. By 1880, Christmas card production had become a massive industry. Publishers were printing millions of cards every year. You could buy them at corner shops, from street vendors, through catalogs. There were cards for every taste, every budget, every sentiment. And this is where Victorian Christmas cards get wonderfully weird. Because unlike modern Christmas cards, which are mostly sentimental with images of Santa and snowmen and cozy fireplaces, Victorian Christmas cards were bizarre, delightfully, disturbingly bizarre. There were cards featuring dead robins lying in the snow. Cards showing anthropomorphic frogs in top hats. Cards with children being kidnapped by Santa Claus and stuffed into his sack. Cards depicting giant insects dancing. Cards showing vegetables with human faces. One popular card design featured a frog brutally murdering another frog and stealing its possessions. I am not making this up. Modern historians are still debating why Victorians loved such dark macabre imagery on their Christmas cards. Some theories suggest the dead robin symbolized poor children freezing to death, a way to evoke sympathy and encourage charity. Others think the weird, unsettling images were meant to be conversation starters. You'd send someone a card with a murderous frog and they'd be so bewildered they'd have to talk about it. Remember, Victorians were obsessed with death and the supernatural. This was the era of seances, of mourning jewelry made from dead people's hair, of elaborate funeral rituals. They didn't see death as something to hide from. They saw it as a natural part of life, something to acknowledge, even during celebrations. But there's another theory I find compelling. Maybe the macabre Christmas cards reflected the tension at the heart of Victorian Christmas. The collision between the magic and the melancholy, between the idealized vision of family joy and the harsh reality of poverty and loss that surrounded so many people. Not everyone could afford that perfect Christmas. Not every family was gathered around a tree in warmth and comfort. The dark Christmas cards acknowledged that. They said, yes, we're celebrating, but we're not forgetting the darkness. We're not pretending everything is perfect. How different is that from our modern Christmas cards? We carefully curate images of our happiest moments, our most photogenic family gatherings, our most picturesque decorations. We show the magic, not the melancholy. We hide the imperfections. Maybe the Victorians, in their strange way, were more honest than we are. By the end of the Victorian era, around 1900, sending Christmas cards had become an absolute obligation. Middle-class families would send out hundreds of cards each year and expect to receive just as many. It became a measure of social standing. The more cards you received, the more popular and well-connected you were. People would display them in their homes, lining them up on mantelpieces and hanging them from ribbons, showing off their social network to visitors. Does that sound familiar? Isn't that essentially what we do on social media today? Posting our Christmas celebrations, counting our likes and comments, curating our image. The Christmas card wasn't just a way to send greetings. It was the Victorian version of social media, a way to maintain connections, to signal status, to participate in a shared cultural moment. And it all started because one man was too busy to write letters. Henry Cole died in 1882, having lived long enough to see his failed idea become a massive success. Those original cards from 1843, the scandalous ones with children drinking wine, are now incredibly valuable. One sold at auction in 2001 for nearly $9,000, about $12,000 for a card that originally cost a shilling and that nobody wanted to buy. Today, billions of Christmas cards are sent every year worldwide. Digital cards have added to the tradition rather than replacing it. We found even more ways to stay connected during the holidays. But I wonder, have we lost something in the efficiency? When Henry Cole was writing those 200 letters by hand, each one was unique, personal. It took time and effort. The recipient knew Cole had spent part of his evening thinking about them specifically, forming words just for them. Now we can send 100 identical cards in an hour. We can post one Facebook message that reaches everyone we know. We've gained convenience. But maybe we've lost intention. Then again, maybe that's not fair. Maybe the Victorians who bought printed cards felt the same guilt, like they were taking a shortcut, like a printed greeting wasn't as meaningful as a handwritten letter. And yet the card still conveyed something important. I'm thinking of you. You matter to me. I want to mark this moment with you. Perhaps that's what matters. Not the medium, but the meaning. Not the format, but the feeling. The Christmas card revolution taught us something profound. Connection doesn't have to be perfect to be real. A mass-produced card with a personal signature can still make someone feel loved. A brief greeting can still matter. Sometimes reaching out imperfectly is better than not reaching out at all because we're waiting for the perfect moment or perfect words that never come. But while Henry Cole was struggling with his printing press, trying to sell cards that nobody wanted, something else was happening in England. Something darker, something that would make the happy families on Christmas cards seem like a cruel joke to thousands of people. Because while the middle class was inventing new ways to celebrate, the poor were literally starving. And the contrast between Christmas magic and Christmas misery was about to reach a breaking point that would shake the nation's conscience. That's where we're headed next. There's a London you don't see on Christmas cards. A London that exists just streets away from those warmly lit windows and decorated trees. A London where Christmas isn't magic. It's mockery. The 1840s. Historians call this decade the Hungry Forties. And the name isn't poetic. It's literal. People were starving. While Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were perfecting their Christmas tree traditions, while Henry Cole was printing his cards, while middle-class families were learning to celebrate the holiday in new and wonderful ways, millions of people in Britain were facing a question more urgent than what to put under the tree. Will we eat today? Let me take you there. Really take you there. Because this is the part of the Victorian Christmas story that gets left out of the cozy narratives. Ireland, 1845. A farmer walks into his potato field and stops cold. Yesterday the plants were green and healthy. Today they're black, rotting. The leaves have turned to slime overnight. He digs up a potato. It crumbles in his hands, putrid and oozing. Within weeks, the entire Irish potato crop is destroyed by a fungus called Phytophthora infestans. And here's the terrifying thing. Potatoes were not a luxury crop in Ireland. They were survival. For millions of poor Irish families, potatoes were breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Literally. Some families ate nothing but potatoes, 3 meals a day, every day. When the potatoes died, the people started dying, too. Over the next 7 years, approximately 1 million Irish people starved to death. 1 million. Another million immigrated, fleeing to America, Canada, Australia, anywhere that wasn't this nightmare. Ireland's population dropped by 25%. Can you imagine that? 1/4 of an entire nation gone. Now, you might be thinking, but this is a story about English Christmas. Why are we talking about Ireland? Because the famine didn't stay in Ireland. Irish refugees flooded into English cities, particularly London, Manchester, Liverpool. They arrived starving, diseased, desperate. English cities that were already overcrowded, already struggling with poverty and sanitation, suddenly had to absorb hundreds of thousands of destitute people. But it wasn't just the Irish immigration that made the 1840s hungry. England was experiencing its own economic crisis. The Industrial Revolution had promised prosperity, and for some people, factory owners, merchants, investors, it delivered. But for the workers, for the people actually making the products, working the machines, building the infrastructure, they were trapped in a brutal cycle of low wages and high costs. The price of bread, the staple food for working-class families, remained stubbornly high throughout the 1840s, partly due to the Corn Laws that protected wealthy landowners' profits. Meanwhile, wages stayed flat or decreased. As industrial production ramped up, more people flooded into cities looking for work, and basic economic supply and demand meant employers could pay less and less. A working-class family in London in 1845 might have a father working 14 hours a day in a factory earning perhaps 10 shillings a week. Sounds like it might be enough, right? Until you realize that a single loaf of bread cost about 4p. Rent for even the most miserable room, one room for an entire family, might be 3 shillings a week. Coal for heating, another shilling. That leaves maybe 5 shillings for everything else. Food, clothing, shoes, anything that breaks or wears out. Do the math. A family of 5 needs to eat. That 5 shillings has to buy food for 7 days. That's about 8.5p per day for the entire family. Less than a penny per person per meal. What can you buy for less than a penny in 1840s London? Stale bread, watered-down milk, rotten vegetables that markets couldn't sell, and if you were lucky, oysters. Yes, oysters. Here's something that blows modern minds. In Victorian England, oysters were poor people's food. Today, oysters are fancy, expensive. You order them at upscale restaurants and feel sophisticated. But in the 1840s, oysters were so abundant and cheap that they were basically fast food for the working class. Charles Dickens in the Pickwick Papers has a character observe, poverty and oysters always seem to go together. Another character notes that oysters are consumed by the poor in great quantities. The Thames River and the coastal waters around England were absolutely teeming with oysters. You could buy them from street vendors for pennies. They were filling. They were protein. They didn't require cooking. Crucial for families who couldn't afford coal for a fire or didn't have a stove. So, picture this. Christmas Eve 1846. A working-class London family. Father, mother, 3 children sits down to their holiday meal. On the table, a small pile of oysters, some stale bread, and if they're incredibly fortunate, maybe a potato or 2. That's their Christmas dinner. Meanwhile, 3 streets away, in a townhouse lit by gas lamps, a middle-class merchant family is preparing their feast. Roast goose, plum pudding, mince pies, wine, brandy, chestnuts roasting on an actual fire in an actual fireplace. The children have received toys. The tree is decorated. Carols are being sung. The poor family can probably smell that Christmas dinner cooking. Can probably hear those carols, can see the warm light glowing from those windows. How would that feel? Be honest with yourself. How would you feel sitting with your children eating oysters on Christmas while knowing that just a few houses away people are feasting? While knowing that all those beautiful Christmas traditions you keep hearing about, the trees, the gifts, the special foods are happening without you. Would you feel grateful, spiritual, full of Christmas cheer? Or would you feel angry, bitter, forgotten? This is the melancholy beneath the magic. This is the shadow that Victorian Christmas cast even as it sparkled and grew. And here's what makes it even more painful. The 1840s were when Christmas was being reborn as a holiday centered on children, on family, on joy and abundance. All the new traditions, the tree, the gifts, the special meal were explicitly about creating happiness for children, about making magical memories. But if you were poor, if you were struggling, all of this cultural emphasis on children's Christmas joy became a form of torture because you couldn't give your children that magic. You couldn't afford the tree, the gifts, the feast. You had to watch your children's faces on Christmas morning and explain why Father Christmas didn't come to your house. The Victorians tried to solve this through charity. The wealthy and middle classes felt genuine concern for the poor. At least some of them did. Christmas became associated with charitable giving, with providing meals and gifts to those less fortunate. In 1851, a massive charitable event was held in Leicester Square in London. A huge marquee was set up and over the course of the Christmas season 22,000 people who were homeless or destitute were fed roast beef pie, plum pudding, porter, tea, and coffee. The marquee was decorated with festive lights and flowers, creating a kind of temporary Christmas wonderland for people who had nothing. This sounds beautiful, doesn't it? Generous, kind-hearted, and it was. The organizers genuinely wanted to help. The people who ate that food were genuinely grateful. But also, can you imagine the humiliation? Having to line up with thousands of other desperate people in a public space to receive charity, having to admit that you couldn't feed yourself, that you needed the wealthy to save you. There's a reason Charles Dickens' character, Screw's attitude toward charity is so chilling. When the charity collectors ask him to donate to help the poor at Christmas, he responds. Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? That was a real attitude. Many Victorians believed that poverty was a moral failing, that poor people were lazy, immoral, weak, that if they were struggling, it was their own fault. The workhouses, grim institutions where the destitute could go for food and shelter in exchange for hard labor, were deliberately made miserable to discourage people from seeking help. The thinking went, if the workhouse is horrible enough, people will be motivated to work harder and pull themselves up. They'll only come here as a last resort. But what happens when there's no work to be had? When factories are laying people off? When wages don't cover the cost of living? What happens when you've done everything right, worked hard, stayed sober, lived morally, and you still can't feed your children? In the 1840s, thousands of families faced this reality. And at Christmas, when everyone else was celebrating, when the culture was screaming about joy and abundance and family happiness, the poor felt their poverty more acutely than ever. Food historians have done fascinating research on Victorian working-class Christmas meals. What they found is heartbreaking. Many families saved all year, putting aside pennies whenever they could, specifically to buy a goose for Christmas. Not a turkey. Turkeys were for the wealthy. Not a beef roast, far too expensive. A goose. One goose for the entire family. And even that was often beyond reach. So communities developed goose clubs. You'd pay a few pennies every week into a communal fund, and at Christmas the club would purchase geese in bulk at a discount and you'd get your goose. It was like a medieval layaway plan except for a single meal. Think about that. Spending an entire year saving for one meal, one special meal to make Christmas feel like Christmas. And if the money ran out, if you couldn't make all the payments to the Goose Club, then you had no goose. You had oysters and stale bread, and you tried to convince your children that this was still special, still Christmas, still enough. The contrast between Victorian Christmas magic and Victorian Christmas melancholy wasn't subtle. It was stark, violent, even. The same newspapers that published illustrations of the royal family's Christmas tree also ran stories about children found frozen to death in doorways. The same magazines that printed Christmas card designs also published exposés on the horrific conditions in London's slums. Everyone knew. The wealthy knew. The middle class knew. They couldn't pretend they didn't see the poverty. Couldn't claim ignorance. The poor were everywhere, begging on street. Inventing not just Christmas traditions but the entire modern relationship between celebration and social responsibility. And one man was watching all of this. The poverty, the suffering, the contrast between Christmas joy and Christmas despair and becoming increasingly angry. He was a writer. He was famous. He had a voice that thousands of people listened to. And in late 1843, he decided to use that voice to write something that would shake Victorian England's conscience and change Christmas forever. His name was Charles Dickens, and he was about to create the most famous ghost story ever told, one that would haunt the wealthy and give hope to the poor in ways he couldn't have imagined. October 1843. Charles Dickens is walking through the streets of London at night. Again, he does this often, sometimes 15, sometimes 20 m in a single evening. His friends think he's eccentric. His wife thinks he's avoiding family life. But Dickens isn't just walking, he's seeing. He sees things most people hurry past. The children sleeping in doorways, their thin bodies pressed together for warmth. The women standing under gas lamps selling matches, flowers, anything to earn a few pennies. The men slumped against walls, too exhausted or too hungry to move. The faces that look at him as he passes, not with hope, but with the blank stare of people who have learned that hope is dangerous. Dickens has been famous for years now. He's wealthy, successful. His novels are bestsellers. He could stay home in his comfortable house, warm by the fire, and never walk these streets. But something won't let him rest. Something is eating at him. He's been thinking about a pamphlet, a serious, sober, analytical pamphlet about poverty and social responsibility. Something important, something forgettable. And then, somewhere between a grimy alley and a shuttered shop, an idea strikes him. Not a pamphlet, a story, a ghost story. What if he could make wealthy people feel what he's feeling right now? What if he could scare them into caring, not with statistics or moral arguments, but with something more visceral, more emotional, more real? He starts composing in his head as he walks. A miser, a man who has everything but feels nothing. Ghosts who force him to see, to really see. By the time Dickens gets home that night, he's practically vibrating with excitement. His sister-in-law will later write that during the composition of this story, Dickens wept and laughed and wept again and excited himself in a most extraordinary manner. The book he's about to write will be called A Christmas Carol, the subtitle in prose being A Ghost Story of Christmas, and he has exactly 6 weeks to finish it before Christmas. Now Dickens is not a slow writer. The man is a machine. He's been producing novels at breakneck speed for years, often writing in monthly installments, always racing deadlines. But even for him, 6 weeks for a complete book is ambitious. He writes during the day, he walks at night, working out scenes in his head. He becomes completely absorbed in the story. His family barely sees him. When they do see him, he's somewhere else mentally, living in Scrooge's world, feeling what Scrooge feels. There's something you should know about Charles Dickens. He had experienced poverty firsthand. When he was 12 years old, his father was thrown into debtor's prison. Charles, just a child, was sent to work in a factory, pasting labels on bottles of boot polish for 10 hours a day. The humiliation, the fear, the sheer exhaustion of being a child forced to work like an adult. It marked him forever. So when Dickens writes about poverty, he's not imagining. He's remembering. He knows what it feels like to be hungry, to be cold, to be powerless. And he knows something else. He was lucky. He escaped. His father was released from prison. Charles got to return to school to pursue writing to become successful. But what about the children who don't escape? What about the ones still working in factories, still sleeping in doorways, still trapped in poverty with no way out? This is what drives him as he writes A Christmas Carol. This is why he can't sleep, can't rest, can't think about anything else. The story he creates is deceptively simple. Ebenezer Scrooge, a wealthy miser, is visited by three ghosts on Christmas Eve. The ghosts of Christmas, past, present, and future. They show him his life, who he was, who he is, who he'll become if he doesn't change. By Christmas morning, Scrooge is transformed. He becomes generous, kind, joyful. He saves Tiny Tim. Everyone lives happily ever after. It's a fairy tale, really, the ultimate redemption story.